There are two things I want you to picture at the same time. The first is my daughter, Ren, sitting in her car seat with her patent leather shoes on the wrong feet because she dressed herself that morning and refused all corrections. She was holding a drawing she had made of the restaurant. Crayons. The sign above the door was green, which is close enough to the teal it actually is that I considered it a compliment. She had drawn a little figure in the window that she said was me. It had very large hair, which is also fair. The second thing is a text that arrived while I was buckling her in. From my mother-in-law, Sylvia. 9 words, 6 of which I will get to. The other 3 were, see you there. I want you to hold both of those images, Ren's shoes on the wrong feet and that text message, because the distance between them is the whole story. And what happened when we walked through the door of my restaurant that evening, none of them had prepared for. Not one of them. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories, where we tell the quiet ones. The ones that don't need a raised voice because the paperwork says everything that needs saying. If you have ever been made to feel like a guest in a place you built, this one is for you. Stay with me, because the moment this turns is not a confrontation. It is not a speech. It is a hostess stand and a reservation list and a 6-year-old in mismatched shoes, and it is the most complete thing I have ever watched happen in real time. Subscribe if you want to see how it ends. And drop a comment below with one word for the last time someone underestimated you in a room you owned. I read every single one. Now, from the beginning. My name is Adiz Akafer Brennan. I was 33 the year this happened. I had owned Teal, a 44-seat new American restaurant on the ground floor of a renovated building in the west end of our city, for 4 years. Before I owned it, I had cooked in it for 2, and before that I had staged in 4 other kitchens in 3 cities, and before that I had graduated from culinary school at 22 with a clarity of purpose that my family found alarming and my instructors found. One of them told me directly, refreshing. I want to tell you about the restaurant first, because it is not background. It is the whole point. Teal had 44 seats because 44 was the number the space could hold without feeling crowded, and I have never wanted a crowded room. I have wanted a full one. There is a difference. A full room has breathing space between the tables. It has light that lands properly. It has a sound level where you can hear the person across from you without raising your voice, which I consider a requirement for good dining and a reasonable metaphor for good conversation. I had spent 8 months working with a lighting designer and a sound consultant before we opened, which my business partner Dominic said was excessive, and which I said was the whole job. The menu changed 4 times a year because the seasons changed 4 times a year, and I did not see why a restaurant should pretend otherwise. We sourced from 11 local farms. I knew the names of the people who grew the things on the plates. I knew which farm had the better late summer corn and which one's tomatoes ran sweet even in a dry year, and I built the menus around those specificities because I believed that care at the source was audible on the plate if you were paying attention. The reservation book was kept by my front-of-house manager, a steady woman named Celestine who had been with me since the 2nd month, and who had a memory for guests' preferences that I believed was a genuine gift, the same way perfect pitch is a gift, something you can develop but not manufacture. Celestine knew which regulars needed the corner booth for acoustics, and which couple always ordered the same thing but liked to be asked anyway, and she managed the room with the kind of authority that does not require announcement. I was in the kitchen most nights. That is the reality of owning a restaurant that is also your craft. You are in 2 places at once always. You are at the pass calling tickets, and you are in the dining room reading the temperature of the evening, and you are at your desk at 11 doing the numbers, and you are home at midnight remembering you forgot to call the produce supplier back. The restaurant was my second child, which is a thing I understood abstractly before Ren was born and understood with my whole body after. I want to tell you how Teal came to exist, because the how matters for the rest of this story. I had been the head chef of the previous restaurant in that space for 2 years when the owner decided to close. His reasons were his own and were none of my business, but the outcome was that 44 seats of build-out and equipment and a kitchen I had spent 2 years learning the particularities of was going to go dark. I could not let it go dark. Not because I was sentimental about it, though I was, but because I had spent 2 years watching what the room could do when it was run with intention, and I knew it hadn't been run at its full capacity yet. I made an offer within 10 days of being told the news. I had savings from 8 years of cooking in other people's kitchens, and from a period of doing corporate catering on the side that I had found deeply unrewarding but financially useful. I had a business plan that I had written over 3 weeks of lunch breaks and late nights, the kind of plan that is built by someone who is trying to be honest about the numbers rather than optimistic about them. I found a partner in Dominic, a former restaurant manager who had the front of house experience I didn't, and the specific calm under pressure that I needed at my side. And I found a small business lender who looked at my plan and said she had seen a lot of these, and this one had the right bones. I signed the lease on a Tuesday in October, 6 years ago now. I remember sitting at the table in the lawyer's office with the pen in my hand, looking at my name typed on the signature line, and having the specific vertiginous feeling of something becoming real that you have wanted for a long time. It is not entirely comfortable, that feeling. It is the feeling of the thing being yours now, fully yours, which means the thing failing is also yours now, fully yours. I signed anyway. I signed in the careful way I sign things that matter, pressing just hard enough to be legible, not so hard the pen goes through. I called my mother from the parking lot. She said, "My girl." She said it twice. Finn and I had been dating for a year at that point. He came to the restaurant on my first full day of ownership before we had opened, before the build-out was finished, and he stood in the middle of the half-constructed dining room with the drop cloth still on the floor and the lighting rig still being wired, and he said, "This is going to be exactly what you want it to be. Not because you got lucky, because you're going to make it that way." I married him 11 months later. Ren was 6. She had my eyes and her father's stubbornness, and an opinion about everything she had encountered in her 6 years of encountering things. She liked the restaurant in the way children like a place where they are known and welcomed, which she had been since she was old enough to sit upright on a bar stool at the kitchen pass while I did prep and handed her pieces of carrot to keep her occupied. The kitchen staff adored her. Celestine kept a small drawing Ren had made of the dining room behind the hostess stand, tacked to the wall where only staff could see it. Ren was not a difficult child. She was a particular one, which is different. She had preferences and she stated them, and if the preferences were not accommodated, she asked thoughtful questions about why, and if the answers were insufficient, she said so. I found this quality admirable and occasionally exhausting in the way that all admirable qualities in small people are exhausting when you are also running a 44-seat restaurant on a Friday night. My husband's name is Finn Brennan. We had been married for years, which meant we had been married almost exactly as long as I had owned Teal, and I have occasionally wondered whether those two parallel timelines illuminate something or are just coincidence. Finn was a structural engineer, quiet and precise in the way structural engineers tend to be, and he loved Ren with the specific intensity of a man who had not expected to be the kind of person who loved a child that much and had been reorganized by it. His parents are Robert and Sylvia Brennan. They lived 40 minutes away in a suburb where the houses were large and the opinions were settled, and the definition of a proper family dinner did not, as it turned out, reliably include all members of the family. I had understood from the beginning of my marriage that Sylvia had a picture in her head of what the Brennan family looked like at a table, and that picture had been drawn before I arrived and had not been substantially redrawn since. She was not cruel. I want to be exact about that. She was the kind of woman who delivers her preferences as if they are simply the natural order of things, as if wanting the dinner table to look a specific way is not a preference but a standard, and therefore not something anyone reasonable would object to. This is, I have learned, a specific and very effective form of social management because it makes objection feel like unreasonableness rather than disagreement. I had been the object of this management in small ways since Finn first brought me to dinner at their house. The questions that were not quite questions, the observations offered as helpful information. Sylvia asking, the first Thanksgiving, whether I had brought anything, in a tone that suggested she had expected me to, and I had failed to, when Finn had specifically told me not to bring anything because his mother preferred to handle the food herself. I had stood in her kitchen that night with the specific feeling of a person who has been placed on the wrong side of a rule they were never told existed. Robert was quieter. He deferred to Sylvia on family matters, the way men of his generation often did, not from indifference, but from a lifelong habit of letting someone else hold the social architecture. He was not unkind to Ren. He was not particularly warm. He treated her with the mild benevolence of a person who acknowledges a child's existence without adjusting their behavior to include her. He remembered her name and her age, and not much else, and seemed to consider this adequate. There had been moments over 4 years that I had chosen not to make into confrontations. A Christmas where Sylvia had organized activities for the adults that began while Wren was still napping, and expressed surprise that we could not simply leave her with the baby monitor in the upstairs room of an unfamiliar house. A birthday dinner for Robert, where children had not been mentioned in the invitation, and I had assumed the omission was accidental, until it turned out it was not. A summer barbecue, where the seating arrangement placed Wren at a card table set up at the edge of the patio, away from the main table, with the explanation that she'd be more comfortable with the space to move around. I had managed all of these without making them into events. Finn and I had discussed each one in the car on the way home, and each time I had said my piece and he had heard it, and we had arrived at roughly the same understanding: that Sylvia operated by a set of rules she did not examine, that those rules were not personal to Wren specifically, and that the most productive path was gradual pressure over time rather than a confrontation that would harden positions. I had been patient. I believed in patience. I also understood that patience has a floor and that the floor is: my child does not sit at the card table. Finn's sister Nora was there too. Nora I will describe later because Nora matters to this story in a way that is not immediately apparent. The dinner had been Sylvia's idea. A family dinner, she had said to Finn at that new restaurant downtown. She had heard good things. She made the reservation herself. She sent the address to the family group text and said she was looking forward to seeing everyone. The address she sent was Teal, my restaurant. The restaurant with my name on the LLC paperwork and the lease and the vendor contracts and the business license framed in my office in the back. The restaurant where Celestine kept Wren's drawing behind the hostess stand. The restaurant where the kitchen staff knew my daughter by name and kept pieces of carrot at the pass for her. Sylvia had made a reservation at my restaurant and had not mentioned this to me, which meant one of two things. Either she did not know it was mine, which was possible given that I had never specifically said the name of my restaurant in her presence and she had not asked, or she knew and did not consider it relevant. I have come to believe it was the first. Sylvia was many things. She was not, as far as I could determine, deliberately theatrical. The reservation was for 5. Finn, his parents, his sister Nora, and Finn himself. 5, not 6. I learned about the dinner the way I learned most things in that marriage that were happening at the edge of my vision. From Finn the night before in the kitchen, in the particular tone he used when he was telling me something he already felt apologetic about. He said Sylvia had organized a family dinner. He said she'd made a reservation downtown. He said the reservation was for 5. I said, 5. He said my name. Adiz. Quietly, I said, she made a reservation for 5. We are a family of 3. He said he thought she maybe wanted it to be a grown-up dinner, that Wren could stay with the neighbor, that it was just one dinner. I looked at my husband across the kitchen, which was my kitchen, in the house that my restaurant had helped pay for. I thought about the patent leather shoes. I thought about what a 6-year-old girl absorbs when the adults in her life make a reservation for 5. I said, Finn. Your daughter has been eating at that restaurant since before she could form full sentences. The staff know her name. Celestine keeps her drawing behind the hostess stand. She thinks of it as a place that belongs to her because I have raised her to think of it that way. He was quiet. He had the quality, when something was uncomfortable, of becoming very still, and right then he was very still. I said, if the reservation stands at 5, that is the first time in her life your parents will have told her, with their actions and not their words, that there are family tables she does not belong at. She will not understand why, she will just feel it, and she will remember it regardless of what your mother thinks about young children's memories. He said, Adiz, I said, I'm not asking you to fight about it, I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I said I had to make a call. I called Celestine. I asked her to look up the reservation. She found it. Brennan, party of 5, 7:30, table 12. Table 12 is a round table near the east window. It seats 6. It is, in fact, the table where I most often sit when I eat at my own restaurant, which I do approximately once a week on a quiet Tuesday when the kitchen is calm and Celestine brings me whatever the chef wants to try. The east light in the evening comes through the window at an angle that makes everything on the table look like something worth eating, which is not coincidence. I had specified that window placement when I was negotiating the build-out. It seats 6. I told Celestine to update the reservation. Party of 6, same table, same time, she said, The usual setup, I said. Yes, and a booster for the chair nearest the window, please. She said, done. I hung up. I went into the living room where Ren was drawing at the coffee table in her pajamas, pressing very hard on the green crayon for reasons that were probably structural, and I said we were going to Mama's restaurant tomorrow night, and she should pick something nice to wear. She looked up. She said, can I wear my party shoes? I said yes. She went back to the crayon. She did not know anything had happened. She just knew she was going to the restaurant, which was, as far as she was concerned, the normal and correct thing to do. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She was pressing so hard on that green crayon that the tip was going to break before she finished. I thought about telling her. I let her keep going. There is a specific kind of quiet that comes after you have done the one practical thing you had the power to do. Not peace, not quite, but a settling. The reservation was updated. The chair was ready. The rest of the evening was going to be what it was going to be, and I could not control Sylvia's reaction or Robert's silence or the specific texture of whatever conversation happened at that table. I could only control what I had controlled, the number on the booking and the booster on the chair. I had made the room for my daughter. The rest was Sylvia's to do with as she chose. I went back to the kitchen. I made dinner for the three of us, something simple, pasta with whatever was in the refrigerator, because it was a Wednesday and I had been standing in a professional kitchen for 7 hours, and the last thing I wanted was a project. Ren ate hers and told me about a disagreement she'd had at recess that I listened to with full attention, because the disagreements of 6-year-olds are important to the 6-year-olds having them, and I have never believed in treating the small concerns as small. Finn came home at 7. He looked at me with the face of a man who had been thinking about the conversation from the night before for the entire commute home. I said, I called Celestine. It's 6 now. He nodded. He said, okay. He did not say anything else about it that night, which was the right thing. We had said what needed saying. What remained was tomorrow. I want to tell you about the following morning because the text came then. I was buckling Ren into her car seat for school drop-off. She had found her patent leather shoes, which were in the bin where they always were, but she had put them on before I could help her and they were on the wrong feet. I tried to correct her and she said she liked them this way, that they felt right, and I decided there were larger things to manage that day. I was snapping the last buckle when my phone buzzed. Sylvia, a group text to the family thread, details about dinner. What time to meet? The address confirmed. And then at the end, almost as an afterthought, 3 lines that I read twice to be sure I was reading them correctly. She wrote, this one is adults only. Let's give it a real night out. Ren can stay with a sitter, she won't mind, she's young enough not to remember. She won't mind. She's young enough not to remember. I put the phone in my pocket. I closed the car door. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the October cold with my daughter on the other side of the glass. She was watching me through the window with her shoes on the wrong feet and her drawing in her lap, the one she'd been working on since last night. The one I could see even from outside was the restaurant. Green crayon. Big hair in the window. A small figure I understood, looking at it from the sidewalk, that she had added to the drawing. It was next to the big figure. It was smaller with patent leather shoes, herself. She had put herself in the drawing. I got in the car, I drove her to school. I did not say anything about the text. And when I got to the restaurant that morning, I told Celestine to note that the reservation remained a party of 6, and that the booster should stay on the chair. I did not reply to the group text. If you have ever watched someone draw a line around a table that didn't include your child, you know the specific feeling I am describing. It is not just about the dinner. It is about what a child learns when the adults who are supposed to be her family keep adjusting the head count to make the number smaller than it should be. Leave 1 word below for me if you've been there. Just one. I read them. And if you want to see what happens when a 6-year-old in wrong-footed shoes walks into a room her mother owns, subscribe and stay with me. I'll tell you exactly how table 12 looked that night. I spent the day in the kitchen doing what I do on Fridays, which is everything. Prep from 10 to 2, menu review from 2 to 3, a conversation with my produce supplier about the fennel situation, which was ongoing and frustrating, and which I had been managing with the specific patience I reserve for suppliers I want to keep long-term. I had slept 4 hours. I was aware of this but not governed by it. There is a particular alertness that comes from running on less sleep than you need when what you are doing matters, and Friday service at Teal mattered every week the same way it had mattered the first Friday and the 100th, because the people coming through the door had made a choice about where to spend their evening, and I did not take that choice lightly. I had not told anyone on staff about the dinner. There was nothing to tell. The reservation was updated. The chair was ready. The rest was a family matter that I was managing the way I managed most things. Quietly, with preparation, without announcing. Celestine knew everything without being told, the way Celestine always did. She had looked at the reservation when I called the night before and had not said anything beyond done, and that was enough. She did not ask me to explain the situation. She understood the situation was the kind that explained itself when the party arrived. I broke down a case of late season peppers in the afternoon with my cook Javier, who was 23 and still learning to work efficiently with his hands. I showed him the angle on the knife the same way I had been shown it 12 years earlier by a chef in another city, whose name I still invoke in my own kitchen when I am trying to teach something that requires precision. We worked side by side in the quiet of the kitchen at 3:30 when the dinner rush was still 2 hours out, and the room had the particular calm of a place that knows what it is about to become. This is the part of restaurant work that I try to explain to people who don't work in kitchens and mostly fail to fully convey. There is a period before service every day that belongs to the kitchen and to the people in it. The dining room is empty and the tables are being set and the light is still afternoon light and everything that is about to happen is still potential. It is the most honest part of the day. You are not performing for anyone. You are just doing the work and the work is the work and it is enough. I had spent thousands of those quiet afternoons in this kitchen, over 4 years of ownership and 2 before that. My hands knew the room knew my hands. Whatever was going to happen at table 12 that night was going to happen in a room that I had built, and that had held me through more evenings than I could count. At 3:30, I checked in with Celestine about the evening's reservations. She confirmed the Brennan booking at 7:30. Party of 6. Table 12. Booster on the east chair. She handed me the evening sheet without comment. She is not a woman who offers editorial opinions on reservations unless asked, and I had not asked, and she had not offered any. But she looked at me for a moment over the sheet with the particular steadiness she has, the kind that says I see the whole situation and I'm with you and I don't need to say either of those things out loud. I said, "Thank you, Celestine," she said. "The halibut is going to be good tonight. Lindqvist called this morning." I said I knew. I had taken the call at 7 a.m. I went back to the kitchen. I cooked. This is what I do when I am managing something I cannot control by doing. I cook. I knife work and heat and timing, the domain where I am in charge of the outcome, and the outcome is always edible. At 5:30 I sent Marguerite, our floor assistant, to bring Ren from the car where Finn had dropped her on his way to meet his family. Marguerite came back 20 minutes later with Ren in her blue velvet dress, bread roll in hand, shoes still on the wrong feet, describing to Marguerite at length the plot of a book she had finished that week. She came into the kitchen and said, "Hi Mama, can I say hi to Marco?" Marco, who was expediting at the pass, said hi first. She said, "Is it the halibut tonight?" He said yes. She said, "Good, I like how it smells." This child. This child who had no idea she had almost not been invited to a dinner at her own mother's restaurant, standing in the kitchen telling the sous chef she liked the smell of the halibut. I helped her wash her hands. I smoothed her hair. At 6:15, Celestine called through the service corridor to tell me the Brennan party of 4 had arrived. Celestine sat them at table 12. She gave them menus. She told them their full party hadn't arrived yet. She said this pleasantly, the way Celestine said everything, which is to say in a way that closed the door on follow-up questions without appearing to close anything. Sylvia looked at the sixth place setting. She looked at the booster on the chair by the window. Celestine told me later that Sylvia looked at it the way a person looks at something they intended to prevent and did not. Finn texted me at 6:20. "Where are you?" "We're here." I texted back, "On my way. Give us 10 minutes. Then I went to the break room and I found Ren, who had been there since 5:30 with Marguerite, who had been reading to her and who had let her have a bread roll and a glass of apple juice because Marguerite was constitutionally incapable of letting a child be in a restaurant without feeding them something. I smoothed Ren's hair one more time. I said, "Ready to go say hi to everybody," she said. "Can I tell Marco about my book after?" I said after dinner. She took my hand. We walked out of the kitchen through the service corridor and into the dining room. Table 12, near the east window, round, 6 chairs, 1 booster. 4 people already seated. The 5th chair for Finn. The 6th, with the booster, by the window for my daughter, who had drawn this room in green crayon that morning with herself standing in it. I want to tell you what happened because it is not dramatic. It is the opposite of dramatic. That is why it worked. We walked in and Celestine, who had seen us coming and who has the instincts of a person who has managed dining rooms for 15 years, did the thing she does every Friday when I come in from the kitchen after service starts. She said in her normal carrying voice, the one that is not loud but that the room is shaped to carry. Chef Aka Brennan, good evening. Table 12 is ready for you. Chef, not ma'am, not Mrs. Brennan. Chef Aka Brennan. The dining room has good acoustics. I designed it that way. Sylvia looked up from her menu. Robert looked up. Nora, I noticed, looked up and then looked at Finn, and something moved across her face that I filed away for later. Finn was already standing, already coming toward us, already bending down to hug Ren, who released my hand to run the last 4 steps, and hit him at knee height with the enthusiasm of a child who has been in a restaurant kitchen break room for 90 minutes and is ready for the main event. I walked to the table, I sat down, I helped Ren into the booster chair by the window. Sylvia looked at me with the expression of a woman recalibrating. She said, "You're here early." I said, "I'm always here." I picked up the menu, the one I had written and revised 4 times a year for 4 years. I handed Ren the children's menu, which we had because I had children in my restaurant, because I believed children belonged at tables. "This is my restaurant, Sylvia. I've owned it since before Finn and I were married." The table was quiet. Robert looked at the menu, then he looked at me and I saw something shift in his face, the beginning of understanding. He said, "You own Teal." I said, "Yes." He looked at the room the way you look at a room when you're revising your understanding of it. He said carefully, "It's a very good restaurant." I said, "Thank you, I think so too." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his menu again. Then he looked at Ren, who had opened her children's menu and was running her finger down the list with the focus of someone making a significant decision. He watched her for a few seconds, and I watched him watch her, and something shifted in his face a second time. Slower. The kind of shift that is not surprise but recognition. He said, mostly to himself, not to me, "She looks like she's done this before." I said, "She has, every other week for the last 3 years." He looked up from Ren to me. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know." He nodded, the small careful nod of a man absorbing a correction. He went back to his menu. He did not say anything more, but the quality of his silence changed. He had been sitting in it with the ease of a man who believed himself to be a guest. He sat in it the rest of the night differently, more carefully, the way you sit in a room when you understand it belongs to someone else. Sylvia was very still. She is a woman who processes things internally and presents a managed surface, which I respect as a skill even when I am on the receiving end of it. She looked at the booster chair. She looked at Ren, who was studying the children's menu with the focus of someone who has been thinking about this decision for some time. She said, "I didn't realize." I said, "I know." There was a beat. The kind that could have gone several ways. Sylvia said, and I want to be fair to her here because she said it plainly, without the softening she usually applied to things that cost her. "I shouldn't have sent that text." 4 words I hadn't known I was waiting for. Not "I was wrong," not "I'm sorry." Those are easy. She said, "I shouldn't have sent it." The distinction is not small. She named the specific act. She owned the specific act. "That is the beginning of something," I said. "No, you shouldn't have." And then, because I have never wanted the dinner to be about the argument, I nodded toward the menu in her hands and I said, "The halibut is exceptional tonight. It's from the Lindqvist farm about 60 miles north. They pull it that morning." She looked at the menu. She looked at me. She said, "That sounds lovely." We ordered dinner. I want to tell you about Nora because she matters and I almost left her out. Nora Brennan was 31 and had been, for most of the years I had known her, the person in the Brennan family who was loudest about the things Sylvia managed silently. Nora liked Ren. She had said so in the direct way Nora did everything, without cushioning. She had also, over 4 years of dinners and holidays, and one significant Christmas argument I will not detail here, made clear that she did not always agree with her mother's management of the family table. That night, after the menus were ordered and the food was coming and the table had found its way to a temperature that was not exactly warm but was functional, Nora reached across the table and put her hand over Ren's, who was rearranging the silverware in a pattern that I had decided to allow. She said, "Ren, do you know what your mom does?" Ren looked up. She said, "She makes food." Nora said, "She makes this place, all of it, she built it." Ren looked around the room. At the teal walls, the exact color she'd approximated in crayon. At the light, which lands just the way I designed it to land. At the table, set for 6 with the 6th chair by the window that was hers. She said, "I know." She said it the way children say things they have known so long it doesn't occur to them that anyone might not know it. "I know, of course. Why is this being said out loud?" I looked at Nora across the table. She looked back at me with the expression of a person who has chosen a side and is comfortable with the choice. I said quietly just to her, "Thank you," she said. "She put herself in that drawing." I said, "She did." Nora nodded. She picked up her fork. She said the scallops looked right and asked me what I thought, and I told her, and we ate. Nothing was resolved that night in the way that resolutions are usually understood. No declarations. No handshake over new terms. That is not how people like Sylvia resolve things, and it is not, to be honest, how I resolve things either. What happened was dinner. A good dinner, at a table I owned, in a room I had built, served to a family that was still learning what family meant. Ren ate an entire portion of the pasta with brown butter and sage, which had been on the menu since opening night because it is the thing I cook when I cook for myself, and I refused to take it off. She also ate most of a bread roll and a small scoop of vanilla ice cream that Marco sent out from the kitchen without being asked, because Marco had worked in my kitchen for 3 years and understood most occasions without being told. He came to say good night before we left. He crouched down to Ren's level and asked if she remembered the herb names. She listed 5 of them without prompting. He looked at me over her head with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally delighted. I looked back at him with what I hoped communicated gratitude, which it probably did because Marco and I had been communicating in that kitchen for 3 years and had developed a language for it. I signed the check at the table. First time in 4 years, the Brennan family watched me sign the check instead of pay it. The visual weight of that moment landed quietly on everyone and was not discussed. We left at 9:30. Ren fell asleep in the car before we reached the highway, her head against the window, shoes still on the wrong feet, the drawing she'd made that morning in her lap where she'd held it all day. I looked at it in the dark. The green crayon sign, the big figure with the large hair, the smaller figure next to it with the patent leather shoes, both of them standing in the window of the same building. Finn drove. He was quiet for most of the highway, which was his way of telling me he was thinking rather than avoiding. I had learned to tell the difference. Around the third exit, he said, "I didn't know it was that table." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Table 12, the one she always sits at when she eats there on Tuesdays. I didn't know my mother had booked that specific table." I said, "She didn't know that either, she just booked a table." He said, "I know, then, I should have pushed back when she said 5. I said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't because I thought it would become a bigger thing than it needed to be." I said, "It became the same size it was always going to be, just in a room where I had the home advantage." He was quiet for a moment. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, the kind of sound that comes when something is too true to be funny and too close to laugh at directly. I said, "I'm not angry at you. I want you to understand that. I'm telling you what I needed you to do and didn't have, and I'm telling you now because I need you to hear it, not because I need to make you feel bad about it." He said, "I hear it." I said, "Your daughter put herself in the drawing this morning. Before she knew she'd almost not been invited, before I did anything, she just assumed she was in the picture." He said, "Because you've made sure she assumed that." I said, "Yes, and I need you to help me keep making sure." We drove the rest of the way in a quiet that was not angry but was settling, the way water settles in a glass after you set it down. The kind of quiet that has something resolved in it. At home, I carried Ren inside and put her to bed without waking her, shoes and all. I put the drawing on her bedside table so she'd see it in the morning. Then I went to the kitchen and sat at the table where the restaurant planning had started 6 years ago, the yellow legal pad and the pen and the numbers I had been honest about, and I sat there for a while in the quiet of a house where everyone I was responsible for was safe. I did not call Sylvia. I did not send a message to the group text. I had said what needed saying at table 12, and I had said the rest to Finn in the car, and what remained was not mine to manage. What remained was Sylvia's. Things changed after that night in the slow way that things change when the structure is still intact, but someone has finally seen the whole of it. Sylvia did not become a different person. She did not arrive at Christmas having revised her entire relationship to Ren and to me, and to the way she thought about tables. People do not work that way, and I would not trust it if they did. What she did was adjust in small increments over months, the kind that add up to something that looks like, if not warmth exactly, then genuine recalibration. She started asking about the restaurant, not socially but with the specific curiosity of a person who has realized they had a long misunderstanding about what they were looking at and is trying to correct it. She asked about the sourcing. She asked about the seasonal menu changes. She asked, in February, what it had taken to open the restaurant in the first place, and I told her about the savings and the business plan and the small business lender who said it had the right bones. And she listened with the attention of someone who is revising a picture they have been carrying without examining. Once, on the phone with Finn, she mentioned she'd told a friend about the halibut, and the friend had made a reservation. Finn told me this like a small victory, and I received it as one. Robert came to the restaurant the following spring, on a Tuesday, by himself. He sat at the bar and ordered the halibut and ate it slowly and left without making a production of it. Celestine told me. She said he'd left a good tip and said the fish was excellent and asked if it was always from the same farm. She had told him yes. He had nodded and paid and left. I thought about that for a while. A man who had spent 4 years sitting in rooms where his wife organized the landscape, coming in on a Tuesday by himself to eat the fish his daughter-in-law had sourced and prepared, and saying it was excellent and leaving. No ceremony, just showing up and saying the true thing about the food. That was his version of it. I accepted the version he had. Nora started coming to dinner at the restaurant on her own, without family occasion. She always sat at the bar and talked to Celestine and sometimes stayed past service to talk to me when the kitchen quieted. She had opinions about food, strong ones, and she was not shy about them, which made her the best kind of dinner companion. One evening she said, she had no idea it was your restaurant. I said I knew. She said, she would have managed it differently if she had. I said, probably. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that's worth something. It doesn't excuse it. But it tells you what you're dealing with. Habit, not malice. I thought about it. I said, habit is its own kind of choice after a while. She said, yes, but it's more correctable than malice. I said I hoped she was right. She ordered the halibut. She said it was as good as the first time. I said it was better. The Lindqvist farm had had a stronger year. The fish knew it. She laughed. We finished our food. That was us, Nora and I, building something one honest conversation at a time, across a bar at the end of a service, in a room I had built and that had made space for both of us. I am telling you this story from my restaurant. It is open tonight. It will be open tomorrow. Ren is 7 now and has opinions about the menu that she delivers without being asked, and that are, I will acknowledge, occasionally correct. She told me last month that the gnocchi was heavy and asked if I had been using the right potato. It was a question I had also been asking myself. I tested the new potato the following Tuesday and she was right. I updated the prep sheet. The next time she ate the gnocchi she looked at her plate for a moment and said, that's better. Then she kept eating. She did not ask for credit. She did not need it. She just noted the correction and moved on, which is the most useful thing a person in a kitchen can do. She has her own stool at the kitchen pass. Marco put her name on masking tape on the leg. She sits on it after hours and watches the kitchen the way I watched kitchens when I was learning. The way you watch something you are already part of. The drawing is still behind the hostess stand, tacked to the wall where only staff can see it. Green crayon sign. Big-haired figure in the window. The smaller figure beside her in the patent leather shoes. Celestine has kept it there for 2 years. She told me once she thinks of it as the restaurant's first portrait. I think she is right. My mother-in-law came to dinner last month. She made the reservation herself. Celestine showed me the booking. She asked for table 12. She came on a Tuesday alone and sat in the chair by the window, not the booster chair but the one next to it, and she ate the halibut and a new dessert I'd added that week, and she stayed for almost 2 hours. She left a note with Celestine when she paid. It said, this is a very good restaurant. I'm glad it's in the family, in the family. I read that line twice. I kept the note. I put it in my desk drawer, next to the lease, next to the business license, next to the documents that have always said what they needed to say without requiring me to raise my voice. Some things you keep not to hold over someone, not as a record of wrong, but as a measure of distance traveled. As evidence that the space between where something was and where it is can, over time, and with honest effort on both sides, get smaller. I did not reply to the group text that October evening. I did not make a speech at dinner. I did not make anything happen except the thing that was already true. I called Celestine. I updated the reservation. I put a booster on the chair by the window. I brought my daughter to her seat and I sat down. That was all of it. Family is not the people who decide in advance who fits at the table. It is the people who know, without being told, whose name is on the building. The ones who put your child in the picture before you have to ask. The ones who show up on a Tuesday by themselves to eat the fish and leave a tip, and say it was excellent, because saying it was excellent is the version of sorry they have available and they mean it. The ones who order the halibut a second time because it was good and they mean it, and choosing it the second time says something the first visit couldn't. The table belongs to the people who show up for what it actually is. Wren's shoes were on the wrong feet. She sat in her chair by the east window. She ate her pasta. She listed 5 herbs by name to the sous chef who taught them to her. She has been welcome in that restaurant her entire life. Because it was always hers too. Because I signed the lease and wrote the menu and sourced the farms, and hired the staff and built the room so that when a person walked through the door they felt the specific way I wanted them to feel, which is like they had come to the right place. I built it for everyone who walks in. I built it for my daughter. Those two things are not intention. They are the same thing. The room belongs to whoever is willing to sit in it for what it actually is. Wren's shoes were on the wrong feet. She sat in her chair by the east window. She ate her pasta. She listed 5 herbs by name to the sous chef who taught them to her. That's my story. 1 reservation amended from 5 to 6. 1 booster chair at the east window of table 12. And 1 7-year-old who drew herself into the picture at 7 in the morning, in green crayon, before she knew the space had almost not been there. If someone in your life keeps setting an extra place without being asked, without announcement, without needing the credit for it, tell them today. Before another dinner gets planned for 5. Comment below with 1 word for the last table you weren't supposed to be at, and weren't kept from. Subscribe because the next story is just as quiet and just as specific. And it ends the way the real ones always do, with everyone at the right table, in the right seats, in a room that was built for exactly this. I'll see you in the next one. Wren sends her very warmest regards.